Who was it that destroyed Atlantis, and how? There was a golden age a few thousand years ago, around 10 to 12,000 BC. Others argue that it existed 20 to 25,000 years ago, according to ancient texts. Gradually, some disputes started between gods, demigods, giants, titans, humans, and other intelligent life forms, for example, the Atlanteans. Other life forms also that came from Earth and lived among them. There were great countries and cities, but also two thriving, powerful civilizations: Atlantis in the Atlantic Ocean and Lemuria in the Indian Ocean. These disputes were mainly about whether the less developed cultures should be facilitated and supported, or whether they should be left to their own natural development without further intervention. This rivalry was polarized between Atlantis and Lemuria. The oracle at Delphi may have been the first, among others, to give a prophecy, an oracle, essentially a first mediation warning of what will happen if the children of the earth do not stop their discontents and quarrels. The oracle said there would be a disaster. Atlantis, of all the countries and continents of this time period, manifested the most disturbing and disruptive desires. Many of these were not new, but they had not been discussed or implemented during the Golden Age, a time of peace that lasted about 8,000 years before we reached the period we are describing. They claimed that their efforts were to build a paradise, but what turned out to be a horror. The Atlanteans wanted more than what they had in return. And while there was abundant knowledge and abundant material wealth, and everything was free and available to all, they wanted control over the developing civilizations and mainland Europe. Their attention was directed to countries that were not their colonies. Greece, though friendly, was the only country in that region of the world over which Atlantis had no influence. The Greek kings wanted to maintain their neutrality. The Atlanteans were not pleased and considered that they had sided with Lemurians and their right hand, the empire of the Hindu Rama. And you can read about Rama in articles Adam's Bridge, an artificial bridge 1.7 million years ago, with evidence that it's not shared by the scientific community. But eventually Atlantis decided to send a naval fleet to the eastern Mediterranean for purposes of intimidation, of course, with the support of its allies, such as the areas we call now Spain, Portugal, and others. However, what began as a show of force would escalate. They started a process of censored information and false reports in order to confuse their opponents. Propaganda, right? Surprisingly, the Oracle of Delphi was still able to receive reliable data. An indirect way was by Atlanteans who saw danger ahead and began to move away from the main body. Entire families migrated to Greek lands that were friends but not allies of Atlantis. Also, they advanced further north towards today's Russia, but also Transbordia. The Atlanteans at that time, together with their colonies, numbered about 3 billion people. Around 250 million left en masse in every direction when their government decided to launch a naval blockade of the Mediterranean to hit the Lemurians and Rama of India. Atlantis wanted Greece to capitulate and the conflict to end quickly. After all, they had common ancestors and ancestral gods, but once again the Greek kings did not accept. They preferred their neutrality, although it was almost obvious that they sided with Rama of India and the Lemurians of Asia, for they had helped them with the design and construction of the flying Vimanas, the spaceships. The opening moves of the war were not long in being seen on the part of the Atlanteans. Both opposing sides may have had ships of the sea and ships of the air, but their war equipment was something completely different from what we will expect to see. Although descriptions in the archive show that weapons like today, such as nuclear weapons, were used, others show that only mind weapons were used, weapons that were controlled by telepathy. and that these were worse and far greater in destructive power than any physical weapon, even our most modern ones. Soon, the war flared up for good. Great destruction spread to all the Mediterranean countries, and especially to the eastern ones. The atmosphere was becoming increasingly toxic, so that only limited air combat would be possible from now on. An event that very quickly led to humans fighting humans head to head, something that had not happened in many centuries. Mother Nature was now waking up, and many hundreds of volcanoes began to erupt. Earthquakes began that increased the intensity and destructive power. Terrible firestorms consumed all the fuel and spread over an area the size of a country, and that was still the beginning, as humanity was still fighting each other. The Lemurians, led by Rama, bombarded Atlantis and its colonies in South America. Atlantis makes similar attacks. Earth shakes its lands regardless of which alliance they belong to and which side controls them. And when all sides gradually begin to lose strength, either from the disasters they caused with each other or from the dissatisfaction of the earth, Rama's forces erase the great central city of Atlantis from the map. The Lemurians emerge as the winners of the war, but all are losers. The losses are huge for everyone. The sky is now the color of lead, and a deadly dust begins to reign over most of the earth. There are now very few places on earth where the sun shines. Plants all over the world are beginning to succumb to these conditions. Central Atlantis and its 7 large satellite islands begin to crack, boil, and slide into the sea. They sunk in one day. Similarly, in the Mediterranean, the Aegean is no longer as they knew it then, but approximately as we know it today. Lemuria also begins to sink until it is completely lost under tons of seawater. Huge tidal waves covered almost half of the world, while at the same time there was an uplift of the Andes Mountains and other mountain ranges such as the Rocky Mountains. There were uplifts in Antarctica and the present-day Scandinavian coastal mountains, among many others we could mention. At the same time, an army of underwater volcanoes awoke from a deep sleep of centuries and happily came to the surface to breathe fresh air and create a new, completely unpleasant, suffocating, and hot that brought tears to the eyes, heat. Now, with the thick dust and ash brought what we call a nuclear winter, plunging the Earth into yet another severe, long-term glaciation. Whatever survived the now over war would die in the next few moments, but slowly but surely, Earth would restore balance to life on its surface. Few people survived, mainly those who found refuge in deep caves or underground states of the Agartha network. Now, according to some myths, it's said that non-human beings took part in the war in some way. Some species refer to reptiles, reptilians. Perhaps they were the so-called dragons of wisdom. Also, small creatures such as the Rama's apes, which may correspond to the Homo floresiensis or hobbit species. Others argue they may have been gray aliens, although they may be identified with the hobbits. It's also said that some outposts from Selene, from the moon, from the inhabitants there took part in this war. However, because these versions are hazy and unclear, we have not included them in our version of the story. The prehistory of a great and worldwide war is a rather complicated affair. Many of the elements that are likely to compose it can be found scattered in texts from all over the world, which fortunately have survived, from India and Sumeria to the Mayans and the Incas and the Native American Indians in general. Every tradition and every myth of these and other countries seems to contain nuggets of a common prehistory. Like pieces of a puzzle that are not easy to put together, several attempts have been made. One is this one that we just read, in the form of a story with elements of creative imagination to give coherence to things that do not seem to be connected but are more than plausible for sure. This I've translated for you from a Greek article. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.